Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Crossroads of Cognizance, the place where we are creating a community discussion about all things woo woo, life, our experiences, your experiences, sometimes when you share them with us. And we're here just in a community space talking about things we'd normally talk about behind the scenes. You're kind of joining our after hours discussion about whatever topics come up. Typically they're spiritual, but today's an interesting one. I found myself doom scrolling on Facebook, and someone posted a meme that was a quote from Bell Hooks. And so while we're doing our introductions, this gives you about like 2 minutes to Google who that is before we start talking. As we are sharing, we hope that you will comment in the comment section. If you're on Facebook, you're going to need to click on the video so we see your comments. If you're on YouTube, just do your YouTube thing and let us know what your thoughts are. And other than that, who are we and why are we here?
Can I ask a question before we go into that?
Oh yeah.
What is doom scrolling?
So doom scrolling is like a checkout response. So most people will find themselves doing this at the end of their day or after a period of furiously working, and they're just like, you know what, I don't want my brain to do anything. And so you sit there with your phone in your hand, and you can do it on Facebook, you can do it on Instagram, you can do it on YouTube. The YouTube loops are can get pretty intense because they start recommending things and the rabbit hole goes deep. But that's doom scrolling.
Well, thank you, because I was not cool enough to know that. So I'm glad you were.
uh,
So please
well,
continue with introductions.
yeah, I was gonna say I don't know if it's a cool thing. It's definitely a procrastinating thing. But part of those introductions. So yes, I am a procrastinator. Um, this is Procrastination Anonymous. My
Hi,
name is Dahlia Rose.
procrastinator.
And I am half of this broadcast. What I do in my spare time that I have none of is I meditate, I take care of myself to the best of my ability, but my real passion is supporting others. And that comes through my school, the Conduit School. It comes through my work where I do energy healing, work on crystals, work with crystals, and do readings and support other people through non typical and non religious spiritual means. But I'm not by myself.
Hi, my name's Katrina Raspold. I am half of this broadcast. I'm also half of um, crossroadsoccult.com, where my husband and I make our own magical products and offer magical services and spell work. Also, I'm a published author of 42, 45, I don't know, some books. Um, you can find them on Amazon.com. I'm literally one of the, like, no Rasbold on there. I think the only other one might be my daughter Delina, who wrote some books. But yeah, if you just look for Katrina Rasbold on Amazon, you'll find my books. And I also am the editor of Green Egg Magazine, which is I believe it was actually the first pagan publication in print. We are now digital and have been here since 1968. So, and that's thegreeneggmagazine.com. And we have a new issue coming out December 21st that we just put to bed. So that's what I do, and that's who I am.
Very cool. And not a small feat, I have to say. I'm currently trying to write a book, and one is a lot. So 40 plus, yikes, and beautiful at the same time. Hi to those who are joining us now. So our the quote, right? Why
Yes,
are we here?
that's not
So
the
the
quote.
no, it's not. But it's a great question because it changes so much. The quote: how do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed. This quote, when I read it, I instantly felt the divide in myself in areas where this would be incredibly challenging to move through. This quote is from a woman named Bell Hooks. It was a um, it was a conversation, an interview that was done. It looked like an interview that it was an interview that was done.
Uh-huh.
And Maya Angelou was there with Bell Hooks, and there were other notable people. And Bell Hooks was known for her works around love and compassion, and so this is just furthering that point. Now, notably, she would be titled as a theorist, an educator, a social justice worker, American author, all of these things. And really, after this quote, I am like, I want to read everything that she's put out because I feel very aligned with attempting to go towards what she's describing, that or questioning rather. Um, do you have any sort of like starter thoughts or feelings on the quote itself, Katrina?
I do, because this has been a real challenge for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a challenge for me, probably in the same way it's a challenge for you, because let's face it, we're Virgos. And accountability is all about balance, isn't it? And even though balance is a Libra thing, we need it.
Oh yeah.
And it's really hard because, you don't get to be the age you are and the age I am, usually, unless you're very, very blessed, without person or a number of people really screwing you over, and a lot of times seeming to just walk away unscathed. And that's hard to manage. And also, sometimes, not always, but sometimes you're in a situation where those people have to stay in your environment in some way. And that's when that issue of accountability and the word I would use is compassion comes into play. How are we able to hold somebody accountable for the impact they had with us, but still respect the fact that they have the opportunity to change, and also that we have the opportunity to shift how we feel about them and what they did according to that change. Now, I have rarely gotten this opportunity because in my life, I have tended to discard people that hurt me in a big way.
Oh yeah. Same.
When
Burn that bridge.
I've got probably I'm 62, and I've got maybe 5 or 6 people that really are in the boat that sailed very far out to sea. And that boat is called people who are no longer, as my mentor used to say, within my sphere of influence.
Mm.
And so they are, I wouldn't say dead to me, they're inconsequential to me because of their actions. And those are the people that, I'm going to be quite honest, they will never make it back. They absolutely will never make it back. And so I do have that group of people that, I gave you a chance and you blew it. I gave you another chance later, years later, you did exactly the same thing, blew it again. And so third time is not a charm, you're gone. And I do have a person that does fit that description. In fact, I have 2. One, interestingly enough, is my oldest son, who I adore. Absolutely adore him. But we had a time for a little over a year that we were completely estranged. And it was a surface thing that happened that spoke to a really deep problem that was not very well addressed between us. And so a thing happened, and I don't want to go too deeply into it because it's very personal. A thing happened. He was very triggered by that thing and just said, you know what? That's it. That's it. If that's how you feel, then this is done. And
Hmm.
I reached out to him several times in that year saying, oh man, come on, we can't do this. Life is too short. My mother had died not too long before. And so it was
Wow.
a very sensitive thing that I wish I'd had more time with her. And I approached him in several different ways. Now, in this case, I was not angry with him. I sort of became angry with him for allowing this to continue to be a problem when I was right there willing to be accountable, willing to listen, willing to work it out. Now, we're fine now. That was many years ago. And we've talked about it since then at length. And he's just very clear that, look, I was really deep in my own healing at that time. And I responded from a wounded place. And I've worked really hard on that. I'm so glad you're in my life now. I'm sorry we lost that time, but I needed that time. And so we're good. We're good. And so that I would say was an instance where I could hold him accountable. I could see that he worked hard to make changes that would benefit our relationship so that we could then have a relationship. So that's one thing. The next thing is harder, and this is a real toughie, and that's my ex-husband.
Hmm.
Because he and I did not speak for over 10 years. He did not end our marriage in an honorable way. And he did it in a way that was completely blindsiding and unexpected and disruptive and just blew our lives up in a horrible way. And then after that, he did not behave well. He was, wow. His behavior was terrible. And the thing was, his behavior during that time was absolutely conducive with who he was. And we had been married for a total of 17 years and together for 19 years at that time. And so I knew him well. And he, yeah, that's who he was then. And
Hmm.
so there was a lot of regret on my part of, look, you knew who he was. You knew what could happen. But I didn't think that would happen. So it was just a thing. It was a thing that happened. And then we didn't speak for another 10 years once that all got sorted out, once our divorce was final. Every now and then there would be a very cursory, tight text or something regarding the kids that we had together. But we did not speak. So once we started speaking again, I was still very angry and still holding him very accountable. You know, you showed me for 20 years that you are a jerk, you are a problem. And he was very receptive to those conversations. He had been very self-abusive during this time. And he has had a lot of therapy. And this is now, that was in 2007. And so it's 6 years, no, it's got to be more than 6 years. It's a long time, 16 years. 16 years since he came back and apologized and was accountable. But I was still at a place, speaking to our topic of today, where I was saying, you know what, you can be accountable, but you haven't changed. This is
Hmm.
who you are fundamentally. And so you can't be around me because of who you are fundamentally. And for, I would say, 14 years, he worked hard, even after our kids were grown and gone, to show me different ways that he was accountable for what he did and who he was and what he did for all those years, and that he could be a friend and not be threatening and not overstep any boundary whatsoever I set and not be triggering to me. And for him, the person I knew then, to do that was enormous. And so now I look at that quote differently than I would have 15 years ago, because I literally watched a person I would have said could never change,
Hmm.
who completely fundamentally changed through intensive therapy. Now, were we to get married, we might fall into all of those old patterns again. We might
Sure.
set each other off in the same way, but as friends who can now talk about our kids in our grandchildren in a respectful, kind, and friendly manner, it's very helpful. I mean, he just messaged me yesterday, said, hey, Aiden's not texting me. Do you know why he ghosted me? My grandson. So I could, hey, are you mad at Grandpa Humphrey? No, man, I've just been really busy. He's busy. Don't worry, he's just really busy. So, we can have those conversations and not have it be ugly. And it healed a lot in me to be able to release that as well. And it helped me to have been in a healthy relationship for a long time. So I knew what that looked like.
Mm.
Because when I had only had horrible relationships, it was hard for me to create even a positive friendship with him.
Right.
So I know I'm talking a really, really long time, but I just wanted to give those two very personal experiences that I've had in that. So that long, long story was to say, number one, I do believe that people can change. Number two, they have to genuinely acknowledge that there's something that needs to be changed, and that is interfering with their ability to have positive interpersonal relationships. And that it is about them, not about the other people. It's about them. And
Right.
number three, they have to be, willing to make that change, and they have to do the work. Once that is done, then they have to be brave enough to let you know, hey, this is where I am. I'm very accountable for what I've done. I've done this work to try to keep that from happening. I would like to reconnect. Or where are you with that? They then have to be willing to accept whatever you're going to put them through to get back.
Right. Right.
So this
100%.
whole process lined up. And at any point of that process, the person that they hurt 100% has the right to say, nope, you're in the boat. I am not on board for that. I don't wish you anything bad, but I do not wish you here.
Right.
So we can acknowledge a person's capacity for change. I know I am not the same person I was even 10 years ago, much less 20 years ago. Everybody can change. I don't want to be held accountable for things I did in my 20s and 30s. But as Eric says, tell that to the guy who killed people when in his 20s and 30s and he's still in prison. Okay. So yeah, there are some things you don't come back from, but overall, I made choices that hurt people that I don't want to have define me where I am right now.
Sure.
So yes, people can change, but it is still up to the other party to decide whether they are willing or interested in reestablishing that contact. I hope that answered that question.
More than answered.
Okay.
It brought forward a lot of feelings, right? I mean, especially clinging onto that piece of allowing the injured party to maintain their autonomy in their decision making process, because so often apologies or the mending of bridges is presented with that hope that everything will be fine, and it doesn't give the other party the opportunity to go through their healing process, because there's a ripple effect, and I think people sort of think it's like a rock hitting the side of a mountain, but the rock never falls down, or you throw the stone in the water and there is no ripple, it just drops. And it's like, no, there are waves of impact that need to be moved through, and we are complex beings. And so it cannot just be, okay, now that I've said it, we're good. And that is like when people say do the work, that is the work. That is, and it's ugly and it's heavy and it's intense and it's beautiful. And then it's like, well, okay, now that the work's done, where are we? And it could just be, we're still not okay. I appreciate you, but we're still not good. I mean, I had that experience with my ex-husband. It was weird. It was a little reversed. 2 years of a very challenging relationship. I ended up getting, I was involved in like some sort of job process for him 2 years after the fact. And I let him know, and I was like, I didn't screw you over. And he was like, and I've had 2 years to think, and I just want to apologize. And I said, oh, okay. I've had people to talk to, therapy, all of that. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I wanted to not reconnect with him, but he had a son. So I had my stepson, and he was very like, no, you can't continue to speak to him. And it hurt. And So I was like, well, do you think I could at least say hello? And he was like, no, we're not there yet. And so it
Wow.
was, yeah, it was, and still like never ended up happening or
Hmm.
whatever. And so it was like, I found myself in this quote looking at his capacity for change, but still like I didn't get to decide, it was him. And so that, a little bit reversed for me. This quote led me into a lot of places. I started thinking about like the Hollywood where you see like the Eastern teacher or practitioner allowing their student to make mistakes and to cuss them out and to go through all of these processes only to be like, okay, you're learning, okay, and never really being like, fuck off. you you are not my student anymore because you just tried to cuss me out or come at me.
Hmm.
And how balanced they seem throughout the process. And I was like, okay, well, maybe it is that they can see in the person a capacity to transform in this moment, and therefore what they are doing is not considered like wrongdoing. So I considered that. My mind also traveled to how I feel like this quote, where we can hold somebody accountable for wrongdoing and recognize their capacity to transform on a personal level, is easier to do than on a macro level. I was like, no, there is no space for you not to hold social justice reform accountability. Like that, it has to happen in order for there to be healing, because bypassing what entire groups of people have been through, black, brown, what have you, and stepping over that is how we got here, where people are like, racism isn't, it's not a thing anymore. That's how we got here, was overlook, and people say that stuff. That is how we got here. And so accountability, I felt like this quote was like, well, do we have to hold them accountable? Yeah, absolutely. But on a smaller scale, I feel like it's easier to move through. Like if this is an interpersonal thing, it's easier to say, okay, accountability looks like I'm going to hear you out,
Hmm.
and perhaps there is some forgiveness involved, and we can work forward from there. Um, I don't think there's room for this quote on a macro level. I really don't.
There's the thing about accountability is that it's hard for everybody.
Yeah.
It's necessary. It's very necessary, but it's very hard to admit I really screwed that up. I really made mistakes there, and I need to be accountable for that. Because as you said, you come at that person not just with a hope, but almost with an expectation that if I just own this, why are you not okay? I said I'm sorry. Well, define okay. I'm fine. I'm okay because you're not in my world and I don't want you in my world.
Right.
And sometimes you just simply cannot come back. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be accountable. And I think sometimes accountability might, even if you're not in touch with that person or can't get in touch with that person, look like writing a letter or just owning it in some way. Now, that doesn't excuse you. You can't just write a letter and say, okay, I said in the letter I'm done and burned it, so I'm done. If you can be accountable, you should be accountable. But yeah, a lot of people are going to also come at you with that expectation of, yeah, I was wrong. I really was wrong. And I just want to move, like you were saying, just move past this and get to the other side. And you sometimes get that feeling they want to be accountable for it, but they don't want any repercussions for it.
Mm. And that's part of accountability.
And that's part of accountability is owning and accepting that there was damage done because of this. And if you could not predict the damage it was going to do to me, that's not my fault. Because what people invariably do is they think about, well, how would I respond? Or how much would it hurt me? That's different because each person has their own set of triggers. They have their own previous experiences
Mhm.
that are going to create their reaction. And they have their own experiences with you. So it might even not just be about the one thing you did, it might be about all the things that they experienced that led up to it.
Right,
It
right.
might be a series of what they now see as abuses. And so it's just this whole conversation about, okay, well, I admit that I shouldn't have, I don't know, punched you in the face, whatever you were happened. But I don't think that me not opening the door for you when we left, or me not calling you because I was going to be late, was also abuse. It becomes this negotiating dance as to what you should be accountable for and what you shouldn't. And there are people, and I've been guilty of this myself, that when somebody really, really wrongs you in a huge way, you go back and you collect all the little ways that they wronged you that you just dismissed before because you really wanted to keep that relationship. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden hold them accountable for those things too.
Right.
So it becomes this whole mess. Accountability is not easy for anybody concerned because you're also, especially if you're an empath, you're there feeling how much they want this. And you're
Yeah.
seeing in their eyes just, oh God, please say yes. Oh God, please let me back in. And you want to sometimes. So you just have to say what Bram said, I appreciate that, but I don't owe you anything. I don't owe you making you feel better. I don't owe you forgiveness. I don't owe you an apology, or excuse me, an atonement, or what? Not even an atonement. What would it be?
A seat at
Exoneration.
the table.
Exoneration. I don't have to make you feel a certain way.
Right.
That's not my job. I don't even have to have this conversation with you. That's not my job. And so it really is very individual. There's some people that even if you do improve your behavior and come back at you later, they are never going to see you differently. They're always going to see you as that person who misstepped, no matter how different you get.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's their right. That's okay. You don't have to keep going back and trying to fix that because they have the right. If you made a mistake and harmed somebody, they have the right to say, nope, you are that mistake to me now. I don't care how I don't care how evolved you get. That's what you're always going to be.
And that's really an interesting thing that you've brought up, that piece of like um hoping to be seen as different, right? So that is not part of the work. I mean, like it feels like a very clear distinction. You can hope to be seen differently, but you can't necessarily perform to that. I think is where I want to go with that. There's this like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to uh, uh, do and be, and your example, your ex-husband showed you things, and I imagine that if they hadn't been consistent, or if they hadn't been like so pronounced from his previous way of being, it would have just been like, oh, you're pandering to,
Yeah.
to an end goal, and that would not have worked. And it feels like that's the case, kind of like what Heidi is saying here, is that piece of when we tap into what we think another person is capable of or not capable of, and then they break that, it creates like this cognitive dissonance, and now there's a gap where you have to get to know who this person actually is,
Mhm.
because you
I
feel like you missed something.
I wanted so badly for you to be better than you are that I created this persona
Mm-hmm.
where you are better than you are. And when you showed me that you're not that, it was your fault. No, there's a little bit of ownership in there too.
It's
If you,
accountability that goes the other way.
yeah, if you genuinely, and especially, God help you, if you had friends telling you, no, 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 listen to me. You need to hear this. And you've got to go back to your friends and say, you were right. That's really hard. What I love is when you were talking about throwing the rock at the mountain. What I envisioned was throwing the rock at a mountain and an avalanche being triggered by the rock.
That's what would happen.
Right, right. And you and I have both had those situations and can speak intelligently to them and regretfully in some ways to them. One thing that I kept thinking about when you were talking about people that are, if you want to say mentors or leaders in the field, Brene Brown is an expert on the concept of shame and compassion. Okay. And her writings are incredible and really changed my thought process about compassion. And when you and I are holding space for clients, I mean, we get some people in, I do, I'm sure you do too, in your field, that these are truly deplorable people. And you're listening to what they're saying and what they're justifying to you. And you have to have the poker face, because when you're in session with somebody, you're their advocate. Right. And so you just have to sit there and say, well, wow, how did that make you feel? Or what
when
do you
really want to ask, how's the other person doing?
Right. What do you think they were feeling when that happened? Or here's my favorite. Some of y'all who have been my clients might have heard this. What outcome did you expect from that? Yeah. From saying that or doing that? What did you think was going to happen? So, yeah, accountability is complicated and necessary. And so many people just don't want to do any of the hard work. So they just go through interpersonal relationships like tissues. Either they have offended or the other person has offended, and they're just done. We're done. We're done. We're done. To be honest, you have to do a lot to get me there. It takes now, it wasn't so much before, but now it takes a lot for me to just fully write a person off. It takes a series of behaviors. I can absolutely say, man, you must have been having a really bad day. Or sometimes it's the compassion of, look, I know you're going through a lot, so I'm going to let that slide. It's less about making excuses for the other person and more about seeing where they are in their life that might have created that behavior.
Interesting.
And deciding whether or not you're willing to create space in that for in your life for that. And yeah, I don't expect my friends to never hurt me, to never offend me, to never say something that causes my eyebrow to go up, my inner eyebrow to go up. It might happen. But it's a matter of, there's this moving line for me, and the line is different for each relationship.
And it has to.
Yeah, it does. So, okay, well, that was your wall right there. So I'm going to excuse myself from this conversation and go. I'll do the Oprah thing. I'm going to go pray about it. Then you come back the next day and say, Jesus said no. We can't be friends anymore.
You're saying that it now takes you a while to get to that place. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, so it gives me hope as a growing Virgo. First of all, on the cusp. Second of all, still getting halfway through life. Because I have been in the business of just cutting people off. Like, just, okay, you know what? You're done with me. I'm done with you. And that's the end of it. I will say it takes me a while to recognize when people do that to me. I'm like, wait, what happened? What do you mean? But I don't do that in like relationships. That's like, so friendships. Yeah. I'm like, okay. My astrologer would talk about like, oh, don't be surprised if you have people coming in and out of your life as part of my personal astrology. And I was like, well, this is horrible. I don't like that, but it happens. And so I've gotten used to it, but relationships tend to be different. And it gets to this point, I want to bring in Micah's comment here. You know, you're not who I made you to be, and now I'm disappointed. A lot of times it is that, and I find struggle as an elder millennial where there is this cloud of entitlement that my generation has around people, not just stuff, people. Like, you need to be this for me. And the partial, I feel like I'm a Gen Xer person in me who's like, okay, you know what? If you're not that, maybe maybe you are having a bad day. Maybe this is a bad moment for you. And it's hard. I struggle with finding, like, holding a person accountable if I determine that they're having a bad day. Because I'm like, well, if they're having a bad day, it'll just go away. But this may be a budding issue that, if not nipped in the bud, now, like you said, it kind of stacks, and now you have to bring in the accountability piece because of prolifically bad behavior based on one incident that they got by on.
Well, one other thing to think about with, again, the aging factor. One of the reasons that I can be more compassionate and generous about cutting people off or letting people go is that I'm more discerning about who I spend my time with.
Yes.
And so that allows me to invest more heavily in people. Like, Mika's not getting away. Okay, she could come, shit in my front yard, set my house on fire, and I'm still gonna love her. Okay,
Be like, oh,
different people have different kinds of accessibility, I guess is the word that I would say, and different levels of grace from me based on what they have shown me, as far as who the person is that they are. And what I love about what we do is we are in the trenches with people. We are seeing people at possibly their worst time.
Yes.
And if they can get through that and still impress me, boy, ride or die. And I'll admittedly say that a lot, there's many of my clients I've become friends with, and friends I want to stay with for a long, long time, because I'm meeting people that genuinely want to improve their lives, genuinely want to know, what am I doing wrong? What do I need to correct here? They work hard to make that course correction. We go through this for a couple of years. They ended up in a completely different place, and we're now bonded. So, and our healers, I mean, that we met through our BioU classes, I mean, those people were balls to the wall. They really wanted to get in there and heal. There's some of them that just did it to learn this new thing, but there's some of them that were really in it to win it. And that's impressive to me. I love that. So as I get older, I found that I am so much more careful about who I'm letting into my inner circles. And that, as I said, lets me give them more grace for behavior, because I know their rhythms. I know, and if it's time that it looks like the universe is sending us apart, I will absolutely release with open arms, because sometimes it really is, I don't want this, you don't want this, but our lives are just not cohesive anymore. And so I think that experience is what gives you the opportunity to evaluate in those terms and recognize that. And it can be sorrowful for both of you, but sometimes it just is what it is.
Right. That makes absolute sense. And that piece of who you let into your sphere of influence, needing to be so variable. It sounds like we're having a conversation about, in order to hold, you don't necessarily have to directly hold people accountable in some spaces, right? But if they're willing to operate on the basis of truth, like I've been known to say to people, as long as you are showing up in your authenticity, we can have a conversation. Even if your authenticity is the worst part of you, at least I'm getting the truth.
Yeah.
And I can work with that versus, a phony version where now I have to hold you accountable. And you
Right.
said this, why you said this, and you're doing that, and the math is not mathing, and we have a problem now.
Yeah.
So I think that discernment piece, when you talk about it's that resonance of truth for me. And from an energetic standpoint, when you are in a shared auric field with somebody who is not willing to approach their accountability, is not in a place of truth, it is incredibly uncomfortable. Like my skin crawls. I want to run from the room screaming, usually that they're lying or something like that, not afraid. But it's an uncomfortable energetic space as well.
Yeah.
And nothing can transform in that sort of energy.
I agree. And you know what makes my skin crawl as well on the other side? And I want to come back to what you were just saying after I say this real quick, is someone who on the other side insists on being accountable for everything.
Hmm.
And so
Interesting.
you had a conflict with somebody and they're like, no, that was totally my fault. No, I was wrong. I was wrong. And you're trying to get out. Look, this was both of us. We both had, no, you were fine. It was all me. It was all me. Those people that are just insisting on riding that guilt train to death and being overly accountable are just as uncomfortable for me as those who
Mm.
refuse accountability. Because I start thinking, if you're that much of a screw up, I don't want you as my friend.
Wow. Yeah.
So there's honest, authentic accountability, and then there's just trying to make everything all better and trying to make that person feel some kind of way. They're both manipulative. Stop it, Bram. They're both manipulative in their own way.
Well timed.
I once had, here's another side road before I get back to my original point that I haven't even said yet. I once had a friend that we had a bet that we couldn't go 30 days without saying, I'm sorry.
Woof.
And it made me so painfully aware of how many times in my day, not just in my life, in my day, I say, I'm sorry. I can be in Walmart and my cart bangs into somebody else's cart, and I'll be like, oh God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I can be in Walmart and someone bangs their cart into me, and I'll say, I'm sorry, as though I'm apologizing for taking up the space they rammed their cart into. I say I'm sorry all the time when there's nothing to be sorry for. And so what that 30 days did was teach both of us different ways to express that. You can say, excuse me, in a nice way. Oh, excuse me. Or I did not mean to run over you just then. There are many ways that you can say it without saying, I'm sorry, because that sentence itself is a definition of you. I am a sorry human being.
Mm.
So if you can rephrase that, it is life altering.
I think it was Brene Brown that said, maybe I don't quote me on that, but there was somebody who said to say thank you instead. Like, thank you. Like if you're late, thank you for waiting for me. And I found that life changing, to your
It's a
point.
good one.
Yeah.
So what I was originally going to say, when we're talking about people who refuse to be accountable, there is that horrible word that we hear misused and thrown out all the time, and that's narcissist.
Narcissism.
Narcissism. It is the new buzzword. It's the new bad thing to be. And true narcissism, yes, that is a problem behavior, just like borderline personality disorder and things like that, that will often be the disruptor of relationships. Sociopathy, psychopathy, those are all things that can be real absolute deal breakers in
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
relationship.
I want to throw in another one.
Mm-hmm.
Dark empaths.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. Go look it up, guys. Please
So what
continue.
I want to point out, that when we're talking about the key word of compassion, and when you're considering whether or not to allow somebody to continue in your life based on their behavior toward you, and we all make those decisions, When we're talking about the narcissist specifically, let's get away from sociopathy and psychopathy and to some degree dark empathy, because those can actually be things that are integral to the birth personality, what you are born with. Narcissism, however, most of the time is an adaptive behavior that has come up due to wounds that happened in their formative life. So it was a series of abusive behavior that person experienced that caused them to have this "I can do no wrong" persona, because if they are fallible, they're going to be attacked. And so there is an absolute pathology that this is a developed behavior. And because it's a developed behavior, it can be an undeveloped behavior.
Right.
Now, if you are born with your brain broken in some way that causes you to have psychopathic tendencies, then you might, that's a spectrum as well, but there might be no avoiding that. You might not ever be able to be conditioned out of that psychopathic behavior. You can manage it, you can learn coping strategies, but the ability to contain it might not be there. With
Right.
narcissism, however, there are breakthrough experiences that can happen to shift that behavior. And so that caused me, learning that caused me to shift a lot of my perspective over people that had narcissistic behavior. When I started viewing that as a coping mechanism rather than an attack on me, I was able to shift a compassionate response. Now, that doesn't mean I want every narcissist in my life. It doesn't. But it means that if people I love and genuinely want to spend time with have narcissistic behavior tendencies, I'm able to work around that and say, this is who they are because of pain and wounding that they experience. And I love them enough around that I'm okay. And over time, I've watched in some of the people I love, those behaviors minimize as they matured, as they got different perspectives and different experiences. So I'm not saying you need to keep narcissists in your life if they're causing you pain. I'm saying that a perspective on why that happens will sometimes alter how you view that situation and help with your decision-making process as to whether you want to stick around to see if that happens or not.
Yeah, it's very healing. It didn't sound like you were making space for the narcissistic personality. It was like, hey, once you realize that it wasn't about you, and this is something that comes up often in conversations about healing and things like that. It's not about you. It's not like 95% of the time, it's not about you. But in these particularly problematic mental health situations, there's been studies that show how your brain actually has come up with new neural pathways and has been altered by negative experiences with narcissists. This can be a new pathway to healing for both mind, body, and spirit. If you're traveling down that road, that's what it sounds like you're talking about.
Right. And it's what the fundamental foundation of that quote is choice. And it's about a choice of perspective. It's about a choice of action based on that perspective. For instance, does this person have significant value in your life to the point that you are willing to work with them on the accountability issue and or see if they have changed or if they have potential to change? Not what you imagine they should be, but within the authentic evolution of their personality. Is that a worthwhile investment for you? And sometimes the answer is going to be no.
Yeah.
I appreciate where you are. You need somebody with more patience, time, and energy to manage your your issues. I am not your person. And I'll do that with clients sometimes. I'll have clients that come to me sending me these, what would be 4-page emails talking about, and I'm attacked by this person, and the aliens are after me, and I have to wear this, I have to have tinfoil on my windows, and my mother never loved me, just this whole thing. And I'm just going, bitch, I'm retired. I'm taking the easy ones now. And so I'm going to refer you to Dahlia. She heals these kinds of wounds. And
then we're going to talk about past lives and self-actualization.
Okay, so here, look at what Bram's saying. Okay, this is true.
And many things can be true at once. My ex had been abused, which merits compassion, but he also victimized me, which is still wrong and merits accountability.
Correct. And I knew Bram's ex and very quickly decided Bram's ex is outside of my realm of influence. So I love Bram. I feel bad for Bram's ex. I have compassion for Bram's ex, but I do not want Bram's ex in my living room. So This is a perfect example of making choices based on where you are in your life with that person. And one of my mentors used to call it dancing distance. And it made me think of when, we were at middle school dances and church dances, and y'all might not have had this because I'm hella old. But yeah, the old ladies would come and put their hand between you and kind of make room for Jesus. You got to leave room for Jesus. And because they didn't want you, rubbing your ugly bits together.
Ugly bits.
So I think about that in relationships. What is your dancing distance with somebody? And how far outside of your circles are you placing those? And that's fluid. Somebody could be, hey, you're in the second circle, and then they do or behave in a certain way. It's like, oh, baby, I got to put you out to 4 now. I love you, but you're a 4.
Right.
Or, that 6 back there is really making an effort to want to be there for you and show the best selves and be authentic. Hey, 6, come on up here. You can be a 2 now. So there's this weird dance.
That's boundaries. That's boundaries.
Yeah,
that's boundaries.
And a lot of what we're talking about is about boundaries and when you should have them, how elastic they should be, and when you shouldn't have them. So there's always discernment as far as, for instance, some people will say you should always have boundaries in relationships, and you should. But at the same time, is it a boundary or is it a wall that's keeping you from getting close to that person? How is that boundary affecting your intimacy and your ability to trust? Is it a boundary or is it a wall? That's what you got to ask.
I think it's important also, what's coming to mind is defining what accountability looks like for you, because I think it's different for different people. I just got done, before we hopped on the show, I was listening to a woman talk about her, it was a group of people who got this story off of Reddit, and they were talking about a weekend experience for this woman where her partner embarrassed her in like a really bad way. And in what seems like an unforgivable way among his friends. And he came back, he was apologetic. There was drug use involved. And so he had that as an excuse. And she didn't know he was on drugs and all these things. And for her, the fact that he came back, explained, he apologized, the friends apologized, and they ousted the friend who was the instigator of it all, was enough accountability for her, and she forgave. And I think for me, the fact that there was drug use and non-communication about the drug use, that's a deal breaker, right? So I say all of that to say it feels important to define what accountability looks like for you. And then when you're, then you can use that as a measuring stick to say, can I approach your capacity to transform? Or, you can say, this person, like you were talking about, the worth of the relationship, like this person is worth flexing on what I know I need for accountability. which then goes into the trust piece, which then goes into, I mean, it's a deep, deep rabbit hole. And maybe you have boundaries up for a while and maybe you don't. Um, but I want to bring us to, so I only gave you guys part of the quote. Ha
Oh,
ha. Tricks have been had. Oh.
we're holding you accountable for that right now.
So the quote actually starts out with, and I didn't leave off most of it, but Bell Hooks says, "For me, forgiveness and compassion are always linked." And then she goes on to talk about or ask the question, how do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed? And I think throughout our conversation here, we have talked about forgiveness, and the only way to approach both accountability and humanity is a level of compassion. But what I love about Katrina's, experiences and recommendations is that um, that flexibility piece. Like each person deserves a level of compassion based on who they are, not based on what they do, not based on what they say, but like who is this person really? And that discernment piece. So
Another thing that people tend toward is when someone's harmed you, and I'm very guilty of this. When someone has harmed you on some level, we tend to demonize that person. And it's very important that we continue to understand this is still a human being who is responding to their own wounds, their own fears, their own insecurities. But we do not have to hold space for that. And again, like you mentioned before, that's boundaries. And there's a difference in setting a boundary where someone is arguing with you about something and they call you a name. And you're like, you know what? I'm going to stop you right there. I'm happy to have this conversation with you so we can work through this issue. You may not call me names. That's off the table. That's a hard no, a hard boundary. And that's not creating a wall with somebody. It might deter their natural behavior because that might be part of their expression of frustration. So they're having to make special allowances for you now creating this boundary, but there's nothing wrong with you creating that boundary.
Right.
That's different than, okay, you just called me a name. We're done. I don't ever want to talk to you again.
Right.
So,
That's not a boundary.
there's, again, boundaries, walls. Which one is it? And so it's all about, and sometimes, if somebody calls me a name and we're arguing and I was already irritated with that person, that might be enough. That might put me over the edge where I'm like, okay, we're done. That's where we're done right there. So, it's again, fluid, flexible, spectrum. Where are you with that person already? And honoring who you are. And I think what it really comes down to is when you're making a decision to, for lack of a better term, entertain and allow somebody to be accountable and stay in your life despite bad behavior, are you over accommodating or are you being rational about it? And the question becomes, is this making you less of a person or more of a person? Genuinely, not in your twisted little brain, but genuinely, is this making you more of a person or less of a person to allow this behavior to be forgiven? Or not just forgiven, but to allow that person to continue to have a space in your life.
I was talking to some aliens yesterday, true story, and they emphasized that feeling of constriction versus expansion. And I feel like that's exactly what you're talking about. Like if you don't have awareness enough to say, well, this makes me feel like less of a person, do you feel constricted and held down? Do you feel tight? That is not a place for where healing can take place. And it will sort of ricochet through your entire life. And then we go into then you go to see Katrina because you're like, what's happening? And then you come to see me and I'm like, look, we both told you the same thing, so if you cannot evaluate verbally or mentally, feel it in your body. Do you feel restricted? And if you feel restricted, if you feel that tightness, further conversation is needed with self, and then the other person, because if you're going to bring somebody in to evaluate how you feel, and 9 times out of 10 they're going to tell you how they feel,
Yep.
and so on, and
Now you
bad.
should feel. The other thing you have to think about when you are accepting someone else's accountability, where they're genuinely saying, look, I screwed up, like with the drug situation. I screwed up. Here's why. This is the pattern that led me to that bad behavior. I own that bad behavior. I'm really sorry. I value you. I want you as my friend or my lover or whatever it might be. I want you in my life. I'm very sorry that happened. The question becomes, was their behavior worth a life sentence?
Mm.
Are you going to be mad at them forever because of this? Or is the sentence just, you're going into exile for a few months. Maybe if we circle around later, I'll feel differently.
Exile.
Yeah, it's okay to say, okay, I understand this is a really shitty thing to say to somebody, but I understand in your brain how you got there. That's not a behavior I would have done, so it's hard for me to, feel empathetic with it. But my brain doesn't bend that way. But knowing you and your brain as I do, I see how it got there for you. But the fact that it could get there for you is a problem for me.
Is the problem.
Right.
That is the problem.
So is it a life sentence, or is it a temporary exile, or is it time served? And then you have to genuinely be done with that, because what we do is we say, okay, I get it. I appreciate you being accountable. Yes, I want to continue to be friends, but man, in the back of your mind, you're still punishing.
Right. Eating toast just the same way you did when you wronged me.
Look at how that bitch is eating crackers over there, just like nothing happened.
Right. Boy, this quote, I feel it's gonna sit with me until next week. I'm gonna be like, part 2, Katrina. No, I'm just kidding. But I hope that you guys are now evaluating what that looks like for you, because it can be paradigm shifting. If you realize where your power is, can you do this thing? Do you even want to do this thing of accountability and compassion and capacity to change and all of that? But I've loved this conversation, and I've learned so much from you, Katrina. Thank you so much for
thanks for picking the topic.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Facebook and doom scrolling. It paid off today. Usually doesn't. But until next time, guys, we will catch you with another interesting topic. But bye for now.
Bye-bye.